On the land, and some
Good morning and good day, all of the participants of the webinar joining us today from all over Europe from at least 4 different time zones. My name is Ave Paulus, President of ICOMOS Estonia, and together with Kadri Kallast, the project manager and good soul, and the heritageHOME project team, we are virtually welcoming you in the Estonian Ministry of Culture. The organization of today's webinar has been a joint effort of our project team and ICOMOS Estonia. We would like to give a short overview of the project before moving on to today's main program. heritageHOME is a research project co-funded by the EU, coordinated by the Estonian Ministry of Culture, and carried out in collaboration with the National Heritage Board, the Ministry of Climate, Tallinn University of Technology, Estonian Academy of Arts, and ICOMOS Estonia. The 3-year-long project focuses on the energy performance improvement of residential heritage buildings. That is, of homes in historical buildings located in national heritage conservation areas or in architectural monuments outside of these areas. The aim of the projects are as follows. First, to align and improve policy measures for deep renovation of heritage buildings. And this ambition of ours is a motivation for organizing today's meeting to gain knowledge on international approaches. Secondly, to develop and institutionalize the necessary user-specific toolset for the integrated renovation service. In order to simplify the renovation process for homeowners, we will develop technical renovation solutions suitable for heritage homes and propose feasible step-by-step renovation sequences. Thirdly, to empower the owners and enable them to take active part in service design and policy making by organizing a series of co-creation events with homeowners and inviting them to give feedback and provide input to the services developed and the policies revised. Fourth, to set up a coordinated system between different enablers and facilitating renovations. We are working towards establishing a one-stop shop and will carry out a series of training events to spread the knowledge. Fifth, to sustain the viability of the developed service and branch out internationally to replicate the service. A few words on the Estonian policies. Currently, both the Heritage Conservation Act and the Building Code are being revised on state level, and our project team is discussing the proposition for possible amendments. The Heritage Conservation Act so far has not addressed energy efficiency issues. Closely to the exemption set in the Energy Performance for Buildings Directive, the Estonian Building Code states that the requirements set for energy performance of buildings do not apply to heritage buildings if compliance with the minimum requirements for energy performance would significantly alter the building's nature or appearance. In practice, this exemption has brought about the tendency to neglect energy efficiency improvements altogether in the renovation of heritage buildings. Yet, it is important to look for suitable options for improvements, as better quality of living conditions increases the homeowner's willingness to invest in the restoration and maintenance of heritage buildings. The homes that are loved are best taken care of. The heritage buildings that are well taken care of will best preserve our cultural heritage. Today's webinar will provide relevant insights to the matter of modernizing living conditions and reducing carbon emissions while preserving the cultural heritage values. We are very thankful to the ICOMOS network for coming on board today, and especially to the presenters who were ready to contribute by giving a talk, regardless of the short notice. We would like to express our thanks to Riin Alatalu for spreading the word and helping us get in touch with the presenters. and also for giving a short presentation today. So thanks again to everyone for joining us today. And now, Riin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ave. Thank you, Ave. Thank you, everybody who is here in the Estonian Ministry of Culture and also our colleagues behind the screen. Europe-wide, the majority of people we have met together already in several working groups, but just a short overview of what has happened so far. I'm very happy when the European Building Performance Directive went under consultations for its amendments. It was International Scientific Committee on Energy and Sustainability, ICES, of ICOMOS that took the lead and made really very thorough comments and commentaries on the directive, and many of them were taken on board. And at the beginning, it seemed that it was really well done and things were discussed properly. But as the process went on, there was acknowledgement that they are taken on board in principles and slogans, but not so much in concrete activities. So that's why we created, literally a year ago, I just checked out that we had our first meeting on 4th of May last year, and a special working group of ICOMOS European members and ICES members, because ICES is a global institution. And the aim of this working group was and still is to create discussions so that, first of all, we have so many ICOMOS members who are not dealing with energy efficiency on daily basis, and that concerned also me before these processes started. That to acknowledge ICOMOS national committees that these processes are going on, and heritage people should be involved in the discussions, and also to learn from each other's experience. And I'm very thankful Estonia has learned quite a lot thanks to this working group. So we have been discussing pros and contras, and also made a short questionnaire on crucial issues. I think we have had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at least meetings so far with this group, and there is a lot that is happening now on national stage, and I hope that we will learn more. Some countries are much more advanced, and issues are discussed much more profoundly, and discussions started much earlier than the others. But for me, as a vice president of ICOMOS for Europe, for me it's important that we get all the European countries going, so that we share the knowledge and learn from each other. I'm very happy that ICOMOS is now, especially ICES, is now running a project called Futurist, and I'm really sorry to learn that Philip Hess, who is in charge of it, cannot join us today. But hopefully someone else can get some overview, or we will get it later on, because I'm not competent on what is happening there. But our working group has put a lot of trust on this project, that it will carry on with the processes that we started on international level. But Kari asked me to give a short overview of what is happening in Estonia, and I'm not going to repeat what Kari is saying, but if you put the next slide, The main discussions that we started with was the notion of making exemptions and easements for the buildings with architectural and historical merit. And we have been debating a lot, really hot discussions on how to define a building with architectural merit. And we, let's say, sort of ended up not really in a dead end, but it was not so easy to define it, because we can, to define it, it's quite easy, let's say, but what we will do with this definition. We discussed between all the buildings that are built before 1940, or the second option was before 1960, when the panel block building started. And to define some criteria, the criteria we dropped. But then what we will do with these definitions, that who will assess the merit when we have to give consultations and give consent to any projects. That is it National Heritage Board, who said that definitely no, because they don't have capacity. And that we are asking too much. It's a big portion of Estonian building stock. Then maybe this can be municipality, and our Ministry of Climate said that forget, we will never put any more targets on tasks on municipalities. First of all, and most of all, they don't have the capacity and knowledge to do it. So that's too much. And at the end of the day, who uses the criteria? Is it municipality who is giving consents to the reconstruction projects?
I am very, very happy to introduce our colleagues from Finland, Marko Puttunen and Julia Mikola. How it is there, north of Estonia, things going on?
Okay, trying to make this program work first. Okay, maybe you can see now our slide. Can you?
Not yet. Not yet, but with
yet.
Teams it might take time. We see white screen at the moment.
That's meidän.
No, yet. Can you try again?
Yes, I have to try again. Seems that I'm sharing it now.
Yeah.
Am I?
We can see all of your presentation with side slides.
And now? Okay, maybe once more. There. How is
Excellent.
it now? Okay,
Floor is yours.
yeah. Sorry about that, and thank you for letting us show you this presentation. It was a little bit quick, this call for us, and I'm not sure how fluent our presentation will be, but we'll do our best from this Villa Oivala sauna studio, where we are kind of like hosting the maintenance people for the Finnish Association of Architects. But okay, so we have a short intro here, if you allow us, or if this program allows me. No, it does not. Yeah. Okay, so kind of like for the intro, I would like to go a little bit back, like the first, adapting the first EU EPBD for Finnish legislation. Already in the 1990s, like the thermal insulation level in Finland was quite good, because Finland is the northernmost country in European Union, and is in that sense also the coldest. So we kind of like have a long tradition of having like a good thermal insulation. So increasing the level of thermal insulation for a certain percentage was kind of like insane here, because it meant that we had to kind of like do over thick thermal insulations to our new buildings, and that is what is actually happening at the moment. But so in that sense, it's a very good question. This what is considered as a historical buildings, because there is this that you can make the exception for historical buildings. So I understand why you have this question, kind of like the main question of the webinar. And especially since the historical buildings or the older buildings usually are like very long lasting, which we think is the most kind of like a economical feature a building can have, then it would be like really stupid to spoil that feature.
And here we can see the insulation levels or the energy efficiency in Finland in old houses. Sorry about the text in Finnish in the diagram. The black line shows how much we have buildings on which era or decade, and the colors show what kind of energy efficiency they have. And we can see that we had already like very efficient buildings in the late 19th and in the early 20th century. And then towards the 50s, or the 60s or 70s, the energy efficiency went down, and after energy crisis in the early 70s, it has the efficiency has gone up again, and only in the 2010s have we sort of come back to the same level that we had in the late 19th century. And of course, because of tighter regulations on energy use, the energy use should be going down, and it is going down, but it's not going down as quickly as it should, as calculated. And there are several reasons for that. The ventilation works differently in naturally ventilated buildings. The ventilation rates are often lower, and in new buildings with the in and out ventilation mechanically, the inside comfort can be very good, but of course that makes people lazy, and nobody wants to turn down the ventilation because you can't feel that it's like changing too much air. Another thing is that solar heat and massive structures are a very good combination, and also they are like very difficult to count, like what kind of energy savings they cause. So they are not taken properly into account. And new buildings have a lot of technical installations, and technical things often function incorrectly or inadequately, and they also need to be repaired quite often. And in new buildings, thermal insulation performance is not as good as it should be, like according to its U value. Like mineral wool insulations have convection that makes it worse than it is in calculations. And with electric equipment, the energy consumption is higher than calculated. And it has been noted that in new buildings, the way of using the buildings causes greater differences than in older buildings, because you couldn't then like misuse technical things that you didn't have.
Okay, so that was kind of like our intro and kind of like shows like what kind of questions we are dealing with when we are like designing restorations and also when we are designing like new buildings. We would like to like look at the building more like a whole from its birth to the death and the everything between, whereas the regulations at the moment lead more to like just controlling the energy use during the building life. But so now we go to your questions here as well as we can. So how are heritage buildings defined in legislation? They are not precisely defined, and that would be, of course, also like very difficult. There are like listes, like some. There are listed buildings which are protected by laws, and then there are like the zoning plans, which is kind of like the most normal way. Then, of course, the World Heritage List, and then there is the Church Act. And but like so there are like different ways of defining what is a heritage building. But then outside of these ways, there is of course like a huge mass of buildings. For example, in the cities where they have like for example, like a bit older zoning plan where they are not listed, but they still are in a way like of our important or valuable heritage. Is the term historical defined and by whom? No, we don't use that term. I kind of like the term historical, and I think it could be used also in Finland, but the term used in Finland is building of cultural, historic, or architectural value. So it's a bit more complicated. And by whom, I think the answer is in the first chapter, mainly when it comes to the laws, it's defined by the National Heritage Agency, and when it comes to zoning, it's usually municipality. That means like a city museum or town museum. And are there exceptions made for historical buildings without formal heritage status? Yes. Like I said, for example, some zoning plans are old, so the municipality museums, anyway, they have made inventations and they kind of like know what buildings are of valuable heritage, and they are quite they are kind of like consulted when these kind of buildings are renovated or changed, altered some way. Actually, in our work, what we are doing quite often, it happens that because we kind of like tend to work with historical buildings, it's quite often so that we deal with a museum, municipality museum, which kind of like defines the value of the building, even though it was not listed officially. So how are heritage buildings taken into account and considered in existing national legislation to implement the EPBD? Actually, I think in the Finnish law, on the subject. The text is very much just a translation from EPBD. So energy efficiency requirements do not apply if the building's character or appearance would be unacceptably altered by compliance with the minimum energy performance requirements. Yeah.
And then there is the question of what kind of exemptions or mitigations regarding energy efficiency requirements are set with regard to heritage buildings. And we have in the law the prohibition of defacement. So not depending on the listed or heritage building, care must be taken not to damage buildings of historical or architectural value or the urban landscape. And this is like quite strictly said, happily. We don't know about any amendments in process, but the new energy efficiency directive will undoubtedly change our building regulations. And is heritage value used as a selection criterion in grant schemes? We don't know that it would be anywhere in Finland. Cultural heritage has not played a role in the award of energy grants. We have had a program with ARA, an agency of the Finnish Ministry of the Environment that is responsible for implementing the state's housing policy. And they have given grants for installation of heat pumps, heat recovery systems, and solar energy installations. But from the beginning of this year, they stopped because they ran out of money. And then Finnish Heritage Agency, Museovirasto, gives grants, but their grants are not for energy renovations. And the same goes with ELY, Transport and Environment Development Center, or something like that.
Well, I could say that our Kirkkohallitus, that is kind of like what is governing the Church of Finland, they are giving grants for listed churches to leave the fossil energy and go to new energy systems.
There is a no, I'm wrong. Ostaan toi kirja. In which ways and by whom private owners of historic buildings are being consulted and advised regarding energy renovation of their properties? There is actually only one guide in Finland concentrating on heritage buildings, that is improving energy efficiency in a renovated project of a building of cultural and historical value from Ministry of the Environment. And then there are like general guides, but they don't take into account historical values. And this governmental guide, it advises how energy efficiency can be improved and presents the obligations set by the legislation currently in force and the opportunities offered by their application from the perspective of both higher energy efficiency and building protection. And the guide has 5 examples of renovation projects.
Okay, so are there any national guidances? Yeah, the National Board of Antiquities, or nowadays the Finnish Heritage Agency, has this like a repair card, korjauskortti, on improving the thermal insulation of a log house. That's maybe the only one that we found at the moment. And then is there any research and development programs? We don't know that there would be, but I think there must be something going on, and especially Professor Juha Vinha would know about this more. I think would be very good to ask him. He's been working on this type of research for maybe at least 30 years now, and he's really good.
And for us, as we designed renovations, there are some very important points that we try to remind the clients and the officials every time we face the same problems. What should be remembered when considering energy renovation? The most important thing is that a long-lived building is always energy efficient, because a lot of energy is taken by like building a house and then renovating it and then demolishing it. So if we just concentrate on the use, on the heating energy, we get houses that are very well insulated but very short-lived.
I'm afraid we are running out of time.
Are we? Okay, I'll try to speed up. Good drying capacity is the most important thing when one wants to achieve a long service life for a building. And one more important thing, if the insulation is already adequate, meaning quite good, there is no sense in adding a lot of it, because it creates risks and it doesn't really save energy anymore.
Do you think we should go on?
Yeah. What do you think? We have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ventilation in renovation is an important thing, where one of the most important things is to remember that if you have an old building that has natural ventilation and old structures, and then you want to put new supply and exhaust ventilation into that building, you have to make the building envelope really airtight, not to create problems with inside air. And here we have some text about the legislation. If you're just renovating an old system, you don't need a building permit for it. If you are making an extension to already existing building, the extension should be or will be treated like a new building, and then it should be according to regulations with new buildings. But if the old house has natural ventilation and it's possible to use that system, then there is an exemption, and it's quite complicated in text in English for me. The extension is only subject to the heat loss requirements for the building envelope and not to the heat loss requirements for the leakage air and ventilation. I won't go deeper into our regulations about that. But according to the studies by the University of Tampere, University of Technology of Tampere, it's not advisable to convert natural ventilation to mechanical ventilation just for energy saving reasons.
Okay, so about the general regulations on renovation and extensions, maybe the first what we have there is the most important, that new construction and renovation are subject to different building regulations. And each of the regulations in the Finnish Building Code defines separately to what extent the regulations apply. So you can find it from there. And the law also says that the renovation and alteration work must take into account the characteristics and special features of the building. And then maybe the most important, like valuable buildings may not be damaged by renovation and alteration work. And this provision is unconditional, says the law.
And then to energy efficiency in renovation. When a building permit is required for a renovation project, improvements should be made if technically, operationally, and economically feasible. And if any of these criteria are not met, there is no obligation to improve energy efficiency. In other words, the authority may not require an energy performance improvement that degrades the technical characteristics of the building or prevents the building from being used for its intended purpose, or if the energy renovation is economically unviable. And improvements may be made, but they must not mean ignoring the characteristics of the building, let alone defacing valuable buildings.
So kind of like, again, it's a very important question. What is an historical building? Yeah, maybe this is our last slide, and that's kind of like the last words you would like to say. That like I think every construction professional who has ever thought about it knows a long-lasting building is always ecological. So there should be no need to change like historical buildings to something else that would like put in danger their longevity. I think that's all from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marko and Julia. We have time for one very, very quick question and comment. If somebody wants to add or comment on something. I cannot agree more with your last slide. And I think that actually heritage and traditional knowledge actually can help to solve some climate issues because much of it, especially in North Europe, is taking into account very hard climate environments and solutions, and has studied with these solutions. So traditional knowledge is there to show us the way. So, but yeah,
I will say it also out loud that I apologize and deeply apologize that there really is a provision in this credit conditions on private houses funded scheme. Because I was a bit surprised last night that I had to take a role also to talk about Estonia. I got lost in the document.
Yeah, Kati.
And I'm very thankful for your very thorough presentation, and thank you for sending me your slides. We'll definitely look into the material you wrote and refer to my links. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now moving forward to neighbors northwest, Sweden, Tor Broström from Uppsala, professor of Uppsala University. Floor is yours. Screen.
Thank you very much. So just to make sure, can you see my screen now?
Yes, with the slides.
Yeah, and hopefully you can see the proper slides now. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tor Broström. I'm a professor in building conservation at Uppsala University, located on the island of Gotland. So as I'm speaking, not very far from Estonia. I will speak about three things today. the Swedish National Research Program on Energy Efficiency in Historic Buildings, European Guidelines for Improving Energy Performance in Historic Buildings, and the Historic Buildings Energy Retrofit Atlas, an international database. So I will be addressing some, but not all of the questions raised. I was rather hoping that somebody from one of the Swedish national authorities could say something about the legal context and the implementation of EPBD in Sweden. We have followed the process of the implementation, and my understanding is that we, at the end of this month, we will know more about that. Yes, actually, so before I move on, so what I had in mind with this presentation is that regulations top down are a necessary but not sufficient condition in order to do the right things in the right way when it comes to improving energy performance in historic buildings. And if you look at it top down, bottom up, for each building, you need to do as much as necessary in order to meet the climate change challenge, but you need to do as little as possible in order to respect the historic values of the building. So we're dealing with that balance. And that balance has to be determined for each individual building at some point. So the rules and regulations, they can give us a direction of where to go, but the specific decisions in most cases have to be made for each building. So yes.
I think we're moving on with the slides, but we're left behind with the opening slide.
Okay.
The presentation is on screen.
Okay. Could you say again? So you're not seeing my slides?
We are seeing just the first one.
Okay.
Share again.
We'll try to share again.
Maybe you're operating with two screens, then it gets confusing.
So do you see on my screen, I have a slide with 3 bullet points.
Yes, yeah, yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just try to move to the next one, which is the Swedish National Research Program. So
Just out of curiosity, what did you have on slide 2?
I'm looking at a slide with the heading, the Swedish National Research Program.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
Okay. In 2007, the Swedish Energy Agency initiated a national research program to promote energy efficiency in historic buildings. The research program in Sweden is called Spara och Bevara, meaning in English, save and preserve. The research program is currently in its 4th and final 4-year stage. The main objectives of the research program has been to build a national competence with international prominence, to develop appropriate methods and technical solutions to improve energy efficiency in historic buildings, and of course to communicate results to various groups of end users. The scope of the program, this addresses some of the issues discussed before about what is a historic buildings. So the program addresses buildings that have particular problems and values that distinguish them from the building stock as a whole. and it's not limited to listed buildings. So therefore, it covers quite a wide range of different types of buildings. As I mentioned, the research program has developed over time. In the first stage, there was a focus on monumental buildings with high and obvious heritage values, typically churches, castles, etc. And the monumental buildings in general and listed buildings in particular are protected in Sweden by the Historic Environment Act, but it's quite a few buildings. In Sweden, only some 3,500 buildings are listed. The rest of the building stock is protected by the Planning and Building Act, and I think this system works much the same way as our Finnish colleagues describes. And the Planning and Building Act says that all buildings have to be managed and renovated in a careful way, and buildings with particularly high values cannot be distorted. And so the research program has changed or evolved from addressing mostly monumental buildings to individual buildings that are more modern, and also to building stock analysis covering districts and even cities. The research areas has covered a sort of broad range of issues: decision support, indoor climate, building stock analysis, values and valuation methods, improvements of the building envelope, ventilation, energy supply, sort of basic issues when it comes to energy improvement. The projects in the research program are all documented, unfortunately only in Sweden. We have some 40 completed projects, and in the final phase, we're now completing 25 more projects one by one, and most of them will have been completed by the end of this year. So more information is provided from the link here, and I will also send my presentation to the organizers so you can take part of that.
Similar to this third, but we see that prepared many wonderful slides, but we only see the third one.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So I've been.
Another movie?
Yeah. Now we are 9.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see the slide. We have seen only the slide number 3.
Sure. Are you using 2 screens?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Maybe easiest way is to share the screen then.
I'll try to share the screen. No, that's not going to work.
Maybe you can send your slides to Kadri, and Kadri can share them.
There is difference between sharing the screen and window. That makes excellent. Now we are in 9 and we see how you move. Excellent. Yeah. Maybe if you can just quickly go through the previous slides that we can see the visuals, your talk. If it is not too, we can take that extra minute.
Okay, so I will go back to, I think this is maybe where we started, about the National Research Program. Started in 2006, and the goals, the scope of the program, it's not limited to listed buildings, but covers a wide range of buildings. Focus has changed over time, from monumental buildings covered by the Historic Environment Act to including more modern buildings covered by the Swedish Planning and Building Act. The research areas, as I said, these are it's nothing new for people who work with energy efficiency in buildings in general. It's about decision support, indoor climate, building stocks, values and valuation, building envelope, ventilation, and energy supply. We are in the final stage of the research program. Previously, there's been around 40 completed projects, and we're now finishing some 25 projects. As I said, it's documented only in the project documentation is only in Swedish, but most of the scientific publications coming out of the project are in English. So the results have been publications, both, towards the scientific community, but also handbooks and so more practical papers. We have more than 15 PhD students as an outcome of the research program, and also I think 4 or 5 permanent research groups specializing in energy efficiency and energy transition in historic buildings. Directly and indirectly, the results from the program has had an impact on national policies, and we can see that from the early stages of the research program, there has been an impact on practice in the field, but it takes a long time, and we need to be a bit patient there. The research program ends formally in June 2024, but most of the projects involved have gotten extensions. So in practice, the program will end at the end of this year. And the research activities and the research funding will be integrated into a large general R&D program on buildings in general. The good thing about that, I think, is that it will be a better way to address the issues of the 20th century part of the building stock. But the very oldest and most valuable buildings, it might be difficult to secure funding for them, given that they stand for a relatively small part of the national energy use. And the plan is also to set up a national network for stakeholders and researchers for knowledge sharing, but also to provide input to policymakers and to research funders. The next thing that I would like to say something about very briefly, but I think it is of great importance when it comes to managing the individual buildings. It's the European guidelines for improving the energy performance of historic buildings. They've been around since 2017. Sorry, there we go. So the scope of the guidelines is it addresses historic buildings defined as historically, architecturally, or culturally valuable buildings, while respecting their heritage significance. So it's not limited to buildings with statutory heritage designation, that is listed buildings, and it applies to historic buildings of all types and ages. And it presents a normative working procedure for selective measures to improve energy performance based on an investigation, analysis, and documentation of the building, including its heritage significance. So, in essence, the guidelines provides a procedure in order to identify appropriate measures or an appropriate package of measures for an individual buildings. And the flow chart shows the procedure in summary, and I'm not going to take your time and go into detail, but I would really recommend you that if you haven't already seen the guidelines, that you should take a look at it. So the basic idea is, rather than having general recommendations that would apply to all buildings, we have a procedure that would allow us to find the right measure or the right measures for any given type of building in any given context. There was a International Energy Agency sponsored a task group on called Historic Buildings Towards Zero Energy. And as part of the work in that task group, we made an assessment of the guidelines. And it turns out that the guidelines have not been used extensively, and there are a number of reasons for that, but still they provide a good foundation for a systematic and transparent approach. So one first step was to provide a handbook on how to use the guidelines, and as a preliminary measure. But the next step, which I think is more important and hopefully would be of interest to some of you who are listening today, is the revision of the European guidelines. The European Standardization Organization, CEN, has initiated a revision of the guidelines, and the convener of this work is a Norwegian colleague, a colleague working in Norway. Her name is Chiara Bertolin. So if you would be interested in working to improve the guidelines, then I would suggest that you get in touch with Chiara about that. The third part, as a way of facilitating good decisions for each building, is the HYBER Atlas, the Historic Building Energy Retrofit Atlas, which is a repository of good practice in the field of energy renovations of historic buildings. So this HYBER Atlas, the database, was developed in two international projects, one Interreg project, and then later with the Task 59, sponsored by the International Energy Agency. So already now the database contains more than 100 different buildings that are well documented. The documentation is peer reviewed to have some kind of quality assurance. And as a teacher and a lecturer, I've found that even that people often ask for good examples, and they want to be inspired by examples. And then there's a value to see best practice, not only from your own country, but also from different countries to provide a range of different options. So if you want to take a look at this database, the web page is here. It's hyberatlas.com, easy to remember. However, as we try to introduce it to Swedish building owners and experts working in the field, we found it difficult to at the first stage, people were interested, but then in the end, very few building owners or consultants took the time to add any new buildings any Swedish buildings to the database. So we carried out a short feasibility study to see what we could do about it, and we found that Swedish end users were very positive to the idea of a database, that there was some room for improvement of the current database. We have some language issues. Should we have English as a common language and have national languages, and how, if so, how will we organize that? And there was also a strong interest in sharing of the good examples, but time and money seems to be a limiting factor. So our conclusion is that in order to make the database more used and more useful, we need to have an editor or a coach, somebody who could help people to organize the data and put it into the database. But still the overall conclusion is that a majority of the people that we talk to are very interested in having such a database. So hopefully we can find some national funding to go ahead with that. But the database is up and running, and if anybody would be interested in adding objects to it, then you can find more information on hyberatlas.com. So it's exactly 11:10, so I've used all my time, and I thank you for listening. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm normally a Zoom user, so I'm not all that familiar with Teams. If you have any questions, you can reach me at this email address. And as I said before, I'll send my PowerPoint presentation to the organizers, and they will send it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tor. We can have one brief comment or question. If anybody has any, then yes, Abby.
I will hold it. And I'll close the microphone. You mentioned that the guidelines apply to all historical buildings of all types and ages. So I wonder how is historically defined then, and are these guidelines obligatory?
No, the point is we try to stay away from strict definitions of what a historic building is, but the point of departure is that we're dealing with a building that has values that we want to preserve for future generations. So the first step in the procedure would be to define these values, and the second step is to see how would energy measures affect, what effect would it have on the values.
Thank you. One personal question. Do you have any buildings that you work in Visby, UNESCO area?
We have been working with some case study buildings in Visby. We also use the whole historic town as a case study for urban building energy modeling, where we take into account not only techno-economic aspects, but also the preservation of heritage values.
Question, all life cycle analysis, which time span you have there?
Which time span for the analysis? The varies. I mean, we haven't been doing life cycle analysis, if that what you were referring to, but rather looking at different scenarios, starting with what would be optimal from a technical and economic point of view, looking at the consequences in terms of the effect on heritage values, and then going back, if you prioritize the preservation of the historic buildings, what impact would that have on energy savings and on the economic aspects?
Thank you. Again, hopefully we have later discussion. Now the final presenter from Ireland, Jackie Donnelly, ICOMOS Ireland.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. And hello, Ave. We were on a committee during COVID, but only got to meet once. I am also not used to sharing on Zoom, so please bear with me. Now, are you seeing my presentation? Yeah. Is it full screen?
It is not full screen, but we have seen your move. Now it is full screen. Thank you.
Oh, good. Okay, so I was going to talk you through a set of guidelines we've recently published in Ireland and give you an idea, because developing those guidelines brought a lot of other things to light, which have been very useful in the run-up to the new EPBD. So I think we're all probably very well aware of the Article 9.6, which allows member states to exempt heritage buildings that are not part of the designated environment. This was something we had proposed, and I'm sure other countries did too. We had actually suggested where the renovation is not technically, functionally, or economically feasible, we wanted to try and cover buildings that maybe were too small to be able to take internal insulation or the like. But however, we're quite happy with the allowance for the exemptions that are there. The approach we took in Ireland was not to look at the historical and the architectural heritage aspects, but to actually talk about the building physics of these buildings. Most historic buildings in Ireland are solid masonry wall buildings. So we chose to call these traditional buildings. And we've defined them as I say, stone or brick solid masonry walls, often with a rendered finish. We don't have historic timber buildings in Ireland. Timber is just used for the roof and floor structures. So these buildings, timber, single glazed windows, timber framed roofs, flexible, damp, vapor permeable construction, and generally built with no damp proof courses. So in Ireland, that will be the majority of the buildings constructed before about 1940, and about 15 to 18% of the building stock. And as you know, it's recognised that a large proportion of that will be still extant and in use in 2050. So they need to be dealt with. So this is just giving you an idea of the kind of range, everything from medieval castles to churches, many different types of housing, vernacular buildings, industrial buildings, and the like. So we've always argued that regardless of any statutory protection on the buildings, the works to upgrade the energy efficiency of traditionally built buildings is different from those appropriate for modern construction. They need to be fully understood before carrying out the works, or else there could be irreversible damage. These buildings need to be considered as a whole. Different elements are not isolated or separated by barriers or cavities. And then there has to be a balance between the requirements of energy conservation and building conservation. So back as far as 2010, we had published guidance for owners of historic and traditional buildings. And I think, as you mentioned with this project, the idea was to empower the owners, to make sure they were asking the right questions of their advisors, of their builders and the like, and that they understood how the building was functioning and how they could avoid damage to it and keep it in good health. So that was a good opportunity at that stage in 2010 to start a conversation with our colleagues on the building regulations side. Currently, the transposition of the EPBD building the regulations to Irish law allow an exemption for protected structures or buildings protected under the Monuments Act, but that's less than 20% of the traditionally constructed buildings. But our technical guidance documents to the building regulations do point out that there are difficulties that may arise when dealing with buildings of traditional construction. And there is in technical guidance document L, which is the one that deals with conservation of energy, there is a whole paragraph that deals with traditional buildings and the type of effects there might be on them. And it says the aim should be to improve the energy efficiency as far as is reasonably practicable, and the work should not prejudice the character of the building or increase the risk of long-term deterioration. So Tor will be glad to know we make reference in our guidelines and in the building regulations to EN 16883, which has been adopted as an Irish standard. And you can see the cover of it there. The building regulations also make reference to our advice series book and to the general statutory architectural heritage protection guidelines. Another very important all-government action plan is the Climate Action Plan, and these plans are updated and revised annually. And from a number of years ago, they recognised that there was a need to develop more detailed guidance, technical guidance on retrofitting energy efficiency measures on traditional buildings. So a steering group was set up. It was chaired by myself on behalf of the National Built Heritage Service, and we included a number of other government departments, the Energy Agency, the Heritage Council, the Office of Public Works and the like, to help produce this guideline. So it was published in December last as an action of the Climate Action Plan, and the aim was to provide clear and robust advice to the specifiers and installers of energy efficiency measures. But we also wanted to make sure it was accessible to a wider audience. Obviously, every historic building is different, so the guidance is strategic more than prescriptive, but it illustrates good practice and the principles and the processes that should be followed. Just talk you through, there are 4 main chapters. We start by explaining what is a traditional building and the types of buildings that the guidance would cover. We cover the statutory regulations about altering traditional buildings, whether they're protected structures, non-protected structures, whether they're in architectural conservation areas or recorded monuments. There's a brief explanation of the building energy rating system. I know many other countries call it energy performance, and its application to traditional buildings, the type of skills and services required. And then we also have a mention of considering the full environmental impact of construction, the whole life carbon assessment of a retrofit project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the use of building renovation passports. Professional skills and competence are extremely important. There are risks when somebody is altering a building which is performed sometimes for hundreds of years, given good service, and then suddenly very comprehensive works have been done in the name of retrofitting. So this needs to be done with care by competent professionals with the necessary skills and expertise. And we give advice on that in the guidance. The specifiers and the installers will also need to be aware when a building project is complex, where there's architectural heritage significance, and they will need particular skill sets for this. We've also identified a number of newer skill sets that need to be developed, such as hydrothermal modelling, thermal bridge modelling and the like, in order to be able to make sure that we're not damaging these buildings. But we do recognise that there are certain low-risk interventions that can be undertaken by a skilled and experienced contractor where a traditional building isn't a protected structure. Chapter 2 then explains the physics of traditional buildings, how heat and moisture are dealt with through the building and the building fabric, the importance of air tightness, ventilation and indoor air quality, the kind of performance assessment methods that are available, calculating U values. I'm not sure if this is the same in Estonia, but we have problems in Ireland with the standard methods of measuring U values for traditional building fabric. They often quite seriously underestimate how well traditional building fabric performs, and there are certain notional default values that have to be used in the calculations, which are often not correct. And then we deal with the potential health risks if there are build-ups of harmful substances. For example, radon is a particular problem in parts of Ireland, and just how to avoid them in the retrofitting works. I suppose chapter 3 then is the meat of the whole guidance on the kind of steps to follow. Again, we have based this on EN 16883, the kind of steps, what should be considered prior to the start of works and then working through. The recommended vapor permeable materials for retrofitting works on traditional buildings. Again, we have a particular problem which came to light developing the guidelines, which is that a lot of the newer materials are actually not certified for use in the Irish climate. So the risk would be on the specifier. And so we're seeing how we can support that and get these through the process. We talk about the preparation installation measures for all the different building elements, and wall insulation is particularly problematic in the Irish climate where we have a very high moisture content. And then we deal with other non-fabric efficiency measures that are low cost, easy to implement, things like lighting and lighting controls, ventilation controls, smart heating controls, and the aspects of bioclimatic design that are relevant. So the step-by-step approach encourages people to assess the building's condition, assess its energy usage, assess its heritage significance, set energy efficiency objectives, determine how complex is the project, both from its architectural heritage significance or any other factors, and then look at selecting appropriate and compatible measures. Implementing them, documenting them, evaluating them, I think is extremely important. I'm just showing you here, it's possibly very difficult to see, but just a kind of a basic traffic light system that can guide people as to which measures are easy to implement and which ones might be problematic. So before any retrofitting works begin, the guidance advises that the building should be in good repair and dry. Research has shown that a damp wall transmits heat at a much higher rate than a dry one. So not only is this a good building conservation measure, it's also a very good energy efficiency measure. We encourage people to look at energy efficient design features that already exist in the building and use and improve these, for example, internal window shutters. We advise that any inappropriate later changes should be reversed wherever possible. So where cement, gypsum and other non-vapor permeable materials have been included in the building, these should be undone where they can without damaging the building. Removing or containing any toxic materials. And then we also advise it's very useful to assess what the building's energy usage was before the works. This can provide some very useful baseline data as to what works and what doesn't. Again, the building must be in good condition, free from excess dampness before any works begin. Because maintenance is often overlooked as an energy efficiency measure, it can be cost neutral or even better, and it reduces the risk of damage to the building and to its character. We look at air tightness, ventilation, and indoor air quality in 3 interdependent aspects of the building that must be addressed in any retrofitting plan. As you know, it's critical to the well-being of the building, and if we get high moisture content levels building up in the building, the timber elements and the organic elements of the building become very vulnerable. You also get problems such as condensation on surfaces and actually within the building fabric itself. And others have said this as well, that people too need to have properly ventilated living spaces for health and comfort. And then the final chapter deals with energy sources. So looking at introducing management systems to assess the energy performance of the building, dealing with existing heating systems. There may be, architecturally significant radiators and the like that might need to be kept and remodeled and reused in the new system. Choosing an appropriate heating system. There's a lot of pressure in Ireland to install heat pumps. So you can see an air-sourced heat pump here on a historic building. We look at renewable energy and traditional buildings and the effect that might have. And then the usual ones of how to accommodate changes and locate the plant. But I also think it's important that, architectural conservation principles and energy upgrading principles are not incompatible. It's in line with good architectural conservation practice that the building is well maintained and dry and in good repair, that you use expert advice in assessing the building and specifying the works, that you use compatible materials. In the case of energy retrofitting, these are ones that are vapor permeable and capillary active, and ensuring reversibility wherever possible, so that if we discover that we have made mistakes, that things aren't working, potentially damaging the building, that these can be taken out if there are unforeseen consequences. Minimizing waste, keeping on upgrading the elements you have rather than replacing them, particularly in the case of windows, and then balancing the needs to conserve energy with minimizing adverse impacts on the fabric. So what we say is don't push the building beyond what is reasonable. And I think that is backed up by the EPBD's new recast. And then I just wanted to briefly talk about sustainability at historic buildings. I think others have already this morning, but the greenest building is the one already built, as Carl Alafante said, that we need to continue to use and reuse our older buildings as an essential component of sustainability and sustainable development. To date, and particularly previous versions of the EPBD, have really concentrated on operational energy, so the energy a building uses in its heating and its cooling and the like, and the fabric first attitude. But it's becoming increasingly clear that we're not going to meet our climate goals by concentrating on operational energy alone, and we have to take account as well of the embodied carbon of our existing building stock. So looking at life cycle analysis is important in assessing sustainability of new buildings, and also in making the case for maintaining, refurbishing existing buildings rather than replacing them, so that we're not losing the embodied energy in the existing building. We're not transporting a lot of demolition waste from the site to put into new landfill. We're not importing and producing a lot of new building materials to make new buildings when we already have a significant building stock itself. Our older buildings were designed to maximize traditional, natural sources of heating and cooling, lighting and ventilation. Most of them were built at a time when fuel was extremely expensive as a proportion of a person's income, so they didn't waste energy. The building stock is made of durable, long-lasting materials that reduce refurbishment cycles and avoid carbon by avoiding new buildings having to be built. And generally, traditional building elements and materials are readily repairable in comparison to things like concrete and the like. Joinery, ironwork can readily be repaired. And then just to give you an idea of some of the future steps, a lot of these came about as a result of our discussions in developing the new guidelines. We have commissioned a study to look at energy upgrading of traditional buildings for a low embodied and life cycle emissions, looking at a case study comparing the baseline case, a low level retrofit, which would be appropriate to a building that has historic internal features, then a more deep retrofit case study versus comparison to demolishing and building a new building. So we're going to be publishing that very shortly. There's also a research project ongoing which we're supporting to identify the hygrothermal properties of Irish traditional construction material and assemblages. And the hope is that that will feed into the national calculation methodology. As I said before, we've discovered that some of those ratings can be, or the default values for historic building fabric can be punishing, and it is not representative of how well they actually do perform thermally. So that will feed in when those results are ready. They'll feed into that methodology. We're also supporting a number of exemplar projects to establish and demonstrate and monitor and publish then best practice case studies about how traditional buildings can be sensitively retrofitted in line with the new guidance. And some of the other work we're doing is looking into research for appropriate materials for use in traditional buildings, particularly wall insulation, and try and support their certification for use in the Irish climate. We're also supporting the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland in developing a grant scheme specific to traditional buildings. Again, because a lot of the wall insulation products are not certified for use in Ireland, this has been causing a problem about rolling out a grant scheme for traditional buildings. So hopefully a pilot scheme will begin shortly. We're also quite aware that we need to develop capacity in the construction industry, across the whole construction industry. So we're looking at supporting training and development of knowledge and skills in retrofitting for the building professionals, for the architects, the surveyors, the engineers, and also for the craft workers who are carrying out the works. We're developing guidance, again, hoping to publish later this year on the installation of solar photovoltaic panels when it's appropriate to put those on buildings in historic areas and listed buildings, protected structures in Ireland. And then we're also hoping to explore with our colleagues on the building standard side about when the EPBD is transposed into Ireland, about trying to see, could there be an exemption from the minimum energy performance standards for buildings in architectural conservation areas. that aren't protected structures. So our guidelines are available here at this QR code, and you can also see the web link. And again, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. Thank you.
Thank you, and bravo, Jackie, for a very, very thorough overview of very holistic approach that you are doing there in Ireland, and specifically as to the traditional buildings and all life cycle assessment that we are eager to read the reports that you are doing. Are there any questions in the audience? In the hybrid audience? Internet. Then I have one very small question about that traditional building and a small scale repair versus deep renovation. That can you talk a bit more about what kind of statistics and characteristics you have in that project that is soon be published?
Sorry, which one?
About traditional buildings renovation and all life cycle assessment.
Oh, yeah.
Analysis. Yeah.
Well, it's just a preliminary report trying to establish some kind of methodology, because I can see that's going to be very important when the EPBD, looking at the global warming potential and the like. So trying to develop a methodology. Now, I have to admit, it didn't give me the answer I was hoping for, in that it does point that if there are good savings to be made in embodied carbon and in avoided carbon, it really would require over the time scale that it would need to be a deep retrofit, comes out with the best results. But still, the more, just for want of a better word, the shallow retrofit, the building that might have important internal and external features that need to be kept, they are well outperforming the demolition and new build of a similar size building. But as I say, we're just opening the conversation on it when we publish it, and there will have to be caveats as to treating buildings of architectural heritage significance. And that's a conversation I'd welcome with all our counterparts across Europe, is how we can bring social and cultural elements of a historic building, how we can bring those into the calculations.
Okay. And it comes to the European vernacular architecture overall, log timber constructions of Scandinavia and North Europe, and so besides the state level protected buildings, actually it is the identity core of Europe. So that's will be very interesting discussion. But I open the floor for the general discussion now. Thank you again, all the presenters, and any comments, discussion. Maybe I open the floor for our project team to speak out, both in internet and in presence.
Yeah, thanks again for everybody. And now just like you asked about your angle. Today we have been focusing on the guidelines, on the buildings, on calculations, but what about property owners? Could you maybe comment on how they receive these guidelines? For example, in very extreme weather conditions, do property owners push for being allowed to do more to insulate their buildings, or are heritage values commonly appreciated by the property owners?
Do you want me to? Will I start?
Yes.
Yeah. It's half and half. In some cases, people do push for. They say they want secondary glazing, and they push for that. We have recommended to them that if you keep your existing windows and repair them and maybe install secondary glazing behind them, that actually that means that you can avoid triggering all the requirements of the building regulations. Whereas if you put in a new window, it has to reach the performance requirements of a new window, a new element. We're hoping again to do research on that as to how we can get a traditional timber sash window certified for use in a historic building. But that's a bit of the far down the line. But then on the other hand, you do have people who are very concerned about their historic building and don't want to undertake changes and really do want to preserve the qualities of their building. So owners are different, like the buildings are different.
May I carry on from here, because you are mentioning certification, and I know that in the audience we have Kaidal and Ainur, who is dealing with certification of reusable material in Estonia, but do other countries, and now it is a discussion time, so everybody can interfere. Do other countries have a system in place how to certify their recycled materials like bricks, windows, etc., so that they can be officially used in buildings?
Well,
I
in
hope
Ireland, we don't, but we know it is coming down the track, and it will have to be addressed as part of the whole idea of circularity.
Because here we get there and see some like brick walls that are made out of like reused bricks, but I know that it's a nuisance how to make them certified as or qualified as a material. Maybe Kaidal, you want to comment on this? What is the situation in Estonia now? Was at least in the audience. I see David Hughes is writing something, and the others.
And maybe somebody just opens the microphone.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't think I was going to go live on air there. No, I just put in the chat that the Irish Green Building Council, in conjunction with ourselves and Earmark and Irish Railways, and I know some other agencies, have floated this idea called the Construction Material Exchange, CMEX for short. And we certainly think that something like that could be adapted to sort of both track and trace historic building materials. What we're looking at doing is within our own building stock, which is quite large as an organisation, to use that as a way of where we repurpose slates or trusses or windows that for very good reasons have no further life in their existing buildings. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Jackie, you're not the CMEX from IGBC.
Well, of course, as a historic buildings architect, I don't want to see the buildings demolished and
of course,
materials reused. I want them kept where they were
100%. No, this is always the danger of, and that's why it would be so important to track and trace, so that the provenance and the reason for why they are there is clearly labelled, and it's not encouraging the pillaging of building stock. Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe to open the door. Yes,
Yes, I have another thing that I'd like to discuss. Actually, two things. The first is I think it's very valuable that you have tried to compile information about policies in different countries, and in particular with respect to the implementation of the EPBD. And now, at least in Sweden, and I think it's the same thing in other countries in the European Union, we're going into a critical phase of the implementation where decisions will be made during this year, and it would be valuable to keep sharing information and see could we possibly use this information for benchmarking in order to see what countries are ahead of us and what can we learn from them. So thank you for taking that initiative. The second thing is that in addition to the using guidelines, thank you for a good presentation, Jackie. We absolutely need a better understanding of the historic building stocks in our countries. And our experience is that you need to categorize the building stock and set up differentiated targets, and also to some extent propose general measures by category. You have to be careful with that, but a better understanding of the historic building stock is really important to do the right things on the right buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. I cannot agree more. But actually, what's used for timber might be used for stone and so on. And the same with the problems of authenticity and values to keep. So actually, timber is evolving tradition too. Maybe to open this theme of working together with homeowners or communication with property owners. From one side and on the other side of how in the country there has been dealt with whole life cycle assessment to open it for wider discussion between seminar presenters and participants. Finland, what are your ideas, or Estonia? Tarmo, we want to make a brief note on today's seminar and discussion on many. Thank you.
I am very happy about the great overview, and I see a good starting or continuous point of collaboration here.
That was short. But to intrigue a bit more, we have several people from ministries in our group here, and we have been listening to several presentations where we talk about the principles and the concern how to get them into documents, relevant documents. What can we do? What should we do to get them into the relevant documents? We have here Ministry of Culture, and in the audience there is Ministry of Climate and others.
Well, yes, thank you for this question, Leon. I'm Resi from the Ministry of Culture and the Heritage Advisor. And in Estonia, as you already said, we have two laws that should be changed regarding this EBBT. It's the Conservation Act and the Planning and the Building Act. We also have a Planning Act. So at the moment we are opening the Building Act and the Conservation Act. So there is a possibility to quite easily get our changes if we have agreed on what we would like to put in there. So that is the question here.
Estonia is doing well.
Well, yeah, I would say that. But we need to agree. So if I may, I would like to specify a little detail that Finland and Marco had in their presentation. And they said that museums are the main partners regarding the historic buildings and their value assessment. And I would like to know how it is done in practice. If, for example, we have not listed building that wants to insulate or do this whole renovation project, who will be consulting with the museum about the architectural value of this building? Is it the municipality, or is it the owner, or is it some third party? My question here.
Yep. Well, quite often, I think it goes the way that if we are doing something that needs a building permission, then the officials from the building permit office from the city, they are kind of like concerned if it is a historic building, even if it's not listed. And either afterwards, when we have left the building permission application, or rather before that, we contact the museum and discuss with them what we are doing and why we are doing it, so that they know beforehand that, or we have a kind of like a agreement that what we are doing is fine for the building, because the officials will, of course, will anyway later ask the museum people like, is this okay or not? But there is no like a strict line like when this is happening. Of course, there is like a huge amount of buildings where what the museum is not interested at all. We are not dealing with those buildings though in our office, but for us it's more like the normal case that we contact the museum first.
Anne from France has some good examples to talk about. Can you talk in the microphone too? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this very good webinar. It was very interesting and very excellent. And in France, we have all the same problems and the same ideas, and that you all show, in fact, in Europe. So we join you for all these points that you developed today, and we are part also for the CEN the renovation changing of the norms that will occur and starting this year. And in the Miro group is what I put in the chat. In the Miro group in France, they will develop a specific book showing. It was really something which has been asked from the architects and from all the end users, is to have a book which gathered all the good example of renovation, and good examples and bad examples also, to see what we can do and what is able, what what a good renovation is and what bad renovation is. So I think it's already something which is good to show also, and to show what real examples and to explain them, and how the retrofitting has been calculated, how the energy efficiency has been calculated, and what are the materials, and afterwards how it had been renovated, considering the heritage of the building and keeping the heritage value of the building. So I think it's something which can be also perhaps spread a little bit more than just for France, and something that we can perhaps work also on, something showing at the European level what are the good examples of renovation, also what are the bad things to do, not to do actually.
Do you know if this will include energy performance calculations before and after renovation?
Yes, exactly. Yes. It will include it. It's really the topic. Yes, totally. They will start this year. And the person who leads this group is a person from the CEREMA. So the CEREMA is in France an institution very close to the ecological ministry in France, and they are working on all the question of this energy efficiency on old buildings, on heritage buildings. Not really old, actually. Most of the time they are not so old. So yes, on ancient building, you can say. And there is also another European project. I don't know if you know it, which is called CALESH. And this CALESH European project also is in energy efficiency and how building can be renovated and should be renovated. So I think there are many countries which are here around the table are present in the CALESH project, and so probably it's something that we can. It's just started this year or so. So it's something perhaps which can be shared also at the ICOMOS level.
Excellent, thank you. And within our project, heritageHOME, we are planning on 28th and 29th of October open seminar when we invite ICOMOS Nordic, Baltic and European colleagues to take part to discuss further these issues. Our time is, we have 6 minutes left. So maybe some final word from the organizers. Adri, right and left to me, and if anybody wants to have some final words, that's the time now. Thank you.
Well, of course, thank you very much for everyone for joining, especially to the presenters. And I think many people already mentioned that we should keep in touch on this subject, so we need to figure out how to do it. And of course, we will share with all of the participants today slides that have been shared with us, and also the recording. So you can also forward this information to who you think is important. But is there any more comments or subjects somebody wants to just mark or mention?
I think as Philippe is not there, but there probably is no one in the audience who is dealing with futurist project, which is a bit sad that we don't get an input from that here. But otherwise, yes, it's nice to see that we are thinking in such a similar way. The concerns are the same, so it's. Yeah, we'll have to keep on talking until we get through the walls.
And it is our big challenge and task how to maintain cultural and biological diversity that is going to extinct in the massive level in current global warming and climate challenges, and not only climate challenges, and how to have climate goals so that they learn from heritage and traditions, as well as take into account climate justice. And that must all be put too into the picture of dealing with energy performance of the buildings, the cultural rights of the identity and of the communities. So, and I'm totally agree with Jackie that actually heritage buildings have so much to teach us, and sometimes the best thing is to keep them, just to maintain them. And exactly the synergy of innovative solutions and traditions might be the key to the future.
That's a wonderful note to end on. I think.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, and talk to you soon, hopefully.